Hello, this is Dr. Surbi, and this is part 2 in the lecture series on updates on COVID 19. In this part, I'll be discussing the clinical presentation and the pathophysiology of COVID 19. So, let's start with the clinical presentation. So, most patients with COVID 19 they experience spectrum of symptoms. Some people infected with the virus they have no symptoms. When the virus does cause symptoms, the most common of them include fever, dry cough, and shortness of breath. Remember, because this is a viral illness, the cough is usually dry. Dry cough is there in around 67% approximately patients of COVID 19. Also, the fever that is presenting is usually high grade in intensity. Now, according to the WHO China Joint Mission on Coronavirus 2019, it was a study including 55,924 cases that was published by Guan et al. In the New England Journal of Medicine. This study shared a whole spectrum of symptoms which can be there in COVID 19. So, the most common symptoms that can occur in COVID 19, the most common of them being fever, which can occur in 87.9% of the cases. This is the most common symptom that occurs. Other symptoms can include a dry cough, which is present in 67.7% of the patients. There can be presence of body aches, fatigues, chills, headaches, etc. Remember, because it is usually viral pneumonia or viral cough, therefore the cough will be dry. That is present in 67.7% of the patients. There can be presence of sputum production also in 33.4% patients if there is associated secondary bacterial infections. Also, if the patient develops pneumonia, then there will be development of shortness of breath, which can occur in around 18.6% of patients. The COVID 19 usually presents as a lower respiratory tract illness. Upper respiratory tract symptoms like running nose or sore throat is usually very less common. So, only 13.9% of the patients they have presenting sore throat. There can be associated constitutional symptoms like headaches, myalgias, arthralgias, chills, as I've already discussed. Uh, Also, apart from the respiratory symptoms, the people with COVID 19 also experience neurological and gastrointestinal symptoms, or both. These can be present with or without the respiratory symptoms. So, even nausea and vomiting can be a presenting symptom in COVID 19. Nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea can be the presenting symptoms. Nausea, vomiting occur in around 5% of the patients with COVID 19 and diarrhea in around 3.7% of the patients. Remember, the gastrointestinal and neurological symptoms, if they occur, they can be present with or they can be present without the respiratory symptoms. Also, if the patient has pneumonia, it is very uncommon to present with hemoptysis along with it. Only 0.9% of the patients who have pneumonia they have hemoptysis present. In pneumonia, it can also complicate to develop bilateral infiltrates and acute respiratory distress syndrome. Approximately 3% of the COVID 19 patients they present with acute respiratory distress syndrome as per the report. Also, there may be associated some eye complications like conjunctival congestion and some dermatological complications. The dermatological complications that most commonly occur are petechial rash. The petechial rash that is there is usually because of the thrombocytopenia that is associated with the coagulopathy in COVID 19. There can also be present of some viral exanthems, just like the normal viral exanthems in children, but they are present in only a few cases of COVID 19. Among the complications, the two most common complication is development of ARDS. And secondly, kidney failure. Kidney failure is mainly because of the microthrombosis and macrothrombosis that causes hypoperfusion induced acute kidney injury, and thus leading to kidney failure. These are the complications of COVID 19. Now, talking about the radiological findings, abnormalities on chest x ray may be present in around 59% of the cases, while the CT scan they reveal abnormalities in 86% of the cases. That is, if a CT scan chest of the patients with COVID 19 pneumonia is done, 86% of the patients will show positivity. So, this was about the spectrum of symptoms that occur in COVID 19 patients. This is what I've already discussed, that the median age of hospital admission in the cases of COVID 19 is around 7 days. After 7 days, they usually require admission to the hospital. After 8 days, they usually develop dyspnea or shortness of breath. On the ninth day, in an average, they develop acute respiratory distress syndrome, and on the 10th day or 10th to 11th day they usually require ICU care, that is they require mechanical ventilation. So the median time for admission to the hospital is around 7 days. 8 days is the median time for development of dyspnea or shortness of breath. 9 days is the median time for development of acute respiratory distress syndrome, and 10th to 11th day is the median time when the patient may require mechanical ventilation and ICU care. So, there's also another important point to note, which was not mentioned in the WHO China joint report, was the development of coagulopathy and presence of APLA antibodies in patients with COVID 19. This is another thing that has been described in nowadays in COVID 19 patients. In COVID 19, because of the development of viremia, there is cytokine storm that develops. Cytokine storm that has occurred, it mainly consists of increase in the interleukin 6, which in turn causes an increase in the plasminogen activator inhibitor 1. Okay, PAI1, it increases, just similar to the case of dengue, and then this increase in the plasminogen activator inhibitor 1 causes a decrease in the tissue plasminogen activator, which is an anti-thrombotic agent. Because there is decrease in the antithrombosis, there is decrease in the antithrombosis, this will lead to increase in thrombosis. Okay, so the thrombosis cascade, it is activated. Progressive thrombotic cascade is activated because of an increase in the plasminogen activator inhibitor 1, PAI1, which causes a decrease in TPA. Also, because of the cytokine storm, by day 10 to 14 there occurs severe endothelial dysfunction because of an increase in the PAI1 and increase leading to decrease in TPA and increase in the endothelial dysfunction. These two together combine and cause excessive microvascular thrombosis. Remember, this microvascular thrombosis, it occurs usually in the small vessels, that is the second degree and third degree vessels of the lungs, and is usually a late manifestation of the disease and has been found to be a major cause of death in COVID-19 cases. So lung is just the ground zero organ of COVID-19. Because of the microvascular thrombosis that is occurring, it can cause various organs to get involved, like in the heart it can cause transient ischemias, in renal in the kidney it can cause rapid onset AKI because of the hypoperfusion, then in the gut it can cause mesenteric ischemia. In the lungs, the pulmonary vasculopathy occurs, which appears as interstitial edema without the alveolar edema, and it appears like cardiogenic pulmonary edema. Okay, and this needs early recognition, and anticoagulation needs to be started to prevent the fatal cascade of the progressive microvascular thrombosis that has occurred. It can affect other organs as well, like the CNS. It can cause paralysis like sudden falling to the ground, etc., and pancreas, it can cause acute pancreatitis also. And skin, also there are few changes that can occur due to the microvascular thrombosis in the form of petechial rashes. Ischemic toes are also reported in some cases of COVID-19. Also to remember that there is because of the disseminated DIC, there is decrease in the platelet count. Immune thrombocytopenia also occurs, leading to this petechial rash. Some COVID-19 reports have also described viral like exanthems that occur in normal viral illnesses in children. These can be seen in COVID-19 as well. A few case reports in dermatology have described viral like exanthems in COVID-19 as well. So this was the entire spectrum of the symptoms and signs in COVID-19. Now I will be discussing the pathophysiology of COVID-19 as per an article that was published in the Intensive Care Medicine Journal. That was by Professor Gattinoni. And remember, the understanding of the physiology of COVID-19 is changing, and now what we know now is that it is a spectrum of the pathologies, not one pathology. This is a spectrum. So let's start. So in normal scenario, any hypoxia, it should cause vasoconstriction of pulmonary vessels. But attachment of novel coronavirus to ACE2 receptors, that is seen in the left side here, attachment of the novel coronavirus to the ACE2 receptors, it leads to pulmonary vasodilatation, that is vasodilatation of the pulmonary vessels. There is abolishment of hypoxic vasoconstriction. So thus there is higher perfusion. Perfusion is high, okay, and the ventilation, because of the coronavirus pneumonia, it is low. Perfusion is high, ventilation is low, so it leads to a low VQ ratio. Okay, so seen in the left side here, low ventilation to perfusion causes a low VQ ratio. This ventilation perfusion mismatch, that is low VQ, causes the patient to become hypoxemic, that is having a low partial pressure of oxygen in the blood. To overcome this, the patient will have to increase the work of breathing in order to get larger tidal volume. Okay, now to overcome this low PaO2 in the blood, that is hypoxemia, the patient will have to increase the work of breathing. At the same time, those patients have increased respiratory drive because of the hypoxia. So as you can see, because of the hypoxemia, there will be increase in the work of breathing, because the patient will try to get larger tidal volumes to overcome this hypoxemia. At the same time, these patients have increased respiratory drive because of the hypoxia, and that will lead to further increase in the work of breathing. Okay, this will lead to large swings in the intrathoracic pressure, leading to increased transpulmonary pressure. The increased transpulmonary pressure will exert stress on the alveoli, leading to what is called as PSILI, that is patient self-inflicted lung injury. Okay, this increased transpulmonary pressure will exert stress on the alveoli, causing PSILI, that is patient self-inflicted lung injury. At the same time, because of the inflammation and the release of cytokines, excessive release of cytokines, we have alveolar injury leading to development of exudates and development of consolidation. Okay, the abolishment of the hypoxic vasoconstriction is still there, and the patients have vasodilatation. Okay, they have vasodilatation because of the abolishment of the hypoxic vasoconstriction, because of attachment of ACE2 receptors to the pulmonary vessels. This leads to vasodilatation of the pulmonary vessels, and because of the vasodilation still there, the ratio between the ventilation and perfusion is now much more decreased. Because of exudates and consolidation, ventilation becomes very low. The ventilation becomes very low, perfusion is still high, and the VQ ratio, it still decreases further. Therefore, the VQ ratio decreases to very low VQ ratio. So let me repeat, in this case, here we have decreased ventilation and perfusion is still increased. So there is a huge shunting process in this pathology leading to severe hypoxia. Okay. Now, as we have learned, certain percentage may have micro or macro thrombi leading to dead space disease. Okay, these are areas of the lung that are ventilated but not perfused. So because of the thrombi, the perfusion will be lost. Okay, so these are areas of lung that will be ventilated but they will not be perfused because of the micro and macro thrombosis. So the ventilation perfusion ratio in these areas of the lungs will be high. Okay, ventilation is high, perfusion is low, therefore VQ is high. So as you see, it's all connected together. The low VQ ratio pathology on the left side eventually might lead to alveolar injury and the self-inflicted lung injury, that is the right side phenotype, and this is exaggerated by increased respiratory drive leading to increased work of breathing, thus leading to patient self-inflicted lung injury. Now, if we look at the radiological finding that goes along with this pathology, in the low VQ, you will see consolidation in peripheral areas. Okay, you will see consolidation in peripheral areas on chest X-ray, or few opacities here and there, but mainly of peripheral distribution. Okay, this is, as we mentioned, leads to hypoxemia, and it will cause the increase in the work of breathing, which is added over by the increased respiratory drive due to hypoxia, and then it will lead to increase in the intrathoracic pressures. That will lead to patient self-inflicted lung injury. Now, and also increase in the exudates and consolidation. So in zones of very low VQ, there will be bilateral pulmonary infiltrates, consolidation, and atelectasis. Now, as you know, there are no specific findings on the chest X-ray that will tell you that this patient may have micro or macro thrombi. So in zones of high VQ, where there is presence of micro or macro thrombosis, there will be no specific chest X-ray findings. You can only find out that the patient may have these high VQ zones with macrovascular thrombosis if the patient becomes hemodynamically unstable and you do an echocardiography. Okay. Now, for CT scans, as on the left side, when the pathology is with low VQ ratios, what we see is areas of ground glass opacities. Okay. Remember, these ground glass opacities are mainly peripheral in distribution. Okay, these are areas of low VQ where there is high perfusion because of the abolishment of hypoxic vasoconstriction, and the ventilation is still low because of the consolidation or pneumonia that has occurred because of the COVID-19, and thus there is presence of peripherally distributed ground glass opacities on the CT scan. Okay. Now, the shunt fraction divided by the gasless fraction, or the ratio of the areas of the lung that are shunting to the areas of the lung that have consolidation. Okay, the areas of the lung that are shunting to the areas of the lung that have consolidation, these the ratio of the two is usually much more than 1. Studies have revealed that it is around 3 plus minus 2.1. Now, as you know, because of the low VQ, and that is the perfusion, the ventilation perfusion mismatch, there occurs hypoxemia that will increase the work of breathing and increase the intrapulmonary pressures, thus leading to the patient's self-inflicted lung injury, thus leading to areas of very low VQ. So when we come into the right side, in areas of very low VQ, you will start seeing bilateral pulmonary infiltrates, consolidation, and atelectasis. In these areas, at the same time, the shunt fraction to the gasless fraction, that is the areas of shunting to the areas of consolidation, they will approach approximately 1. Okay, they will approach approximately 1 with the ratio of approximately 1.25 plus minus zero point 0.8. So to revise, in the pathology of low VQ that we see on the left side, it starts with peripherally located ground glass opacities. Because of the low VQ, that is the ventilation perfusion mismatch, hypoxemia occurs. There's increased work of breathing, leading to increased intrathoracic pressures, leading to patient self-inflicted lung injury. And then it goes to the pathologies of very low VQ that we can see on the right side, where there is presence of bilateral pulmonary infiltrates, consolidation, and atelectasis, which can be seen on the CT scan. The shunt fraction to the gasless fraction in areas of low VQ on the left side is much more than 1. That is, the areas of shunting to the areas of consolidation, there will be much more than 1, with the ratio approximately being 3 plus minus 2.1. While when it progresses to the right side, when there is areas of very low VQ, we can see a shunt fraction to consolidation fraction that approaches 1. Okay. Now, so if you get a CT angio done, we can also look for micro and macro thrombosis as bilateral pulmonary thrombi in areas of high VQ where there is presence of micro or macro thrombi. We can get filling defects on a CT angio. Okay, so this was about the radiological findings. Now, when we put together the pathologies into different phenotypes, on the left side we have low VQ, which is called as the phenotype L. In phenotype L, the elastance is low, since the problem is only in the dysregulation of the pulmonary vasculature. So since these patients, there is no problem with the lung mechanics, and their problem is mainly with the dysregulation of the pulmonary vasculature, thus these patients have a normal compliance and a low elastance. As we have indicated, the ratio between the ventilation and perfusion is low. Okay, so low VQ. Since we do not have much consolidation, the lung weight will be low, and for the same reason, such patients are less likely to respond to any recruitment maneuvers, that is, the maneuvers that open up the collapsed alveoli of the lungs, as in ARDS. Okay, so because the alveoli, they are not collapsed, they do not require expansion, and they will already be well ventilated and open. There is nothing to recruit or open up, and thus in such settings there is low requirement of recruitability maneuvers. Okay, recruiting maneuvers and low recruitability is required. Also, as the alveoli are already well ventilated and open, there is nothing to recruit or open up, and thus in such settings they will require only a low PEEP. To repeat, there is no need of PEEP as there are no alveoli which require expansion. On the other side, where of areas of very low VQ, we have phenotype H, where H stands for high. Okay. Here we have bilateral pulmonary infiltrates, consolidation, and atelectasis because of the self-inflicted lung injury. These patients have ARDS like picture. And a very low VQ ratio. Their lung mechanics are abnormal with high elastance because of the increase in the consolidation. Their lung mechanics are affected and their elastance will become high. The compliance will become low. Okay, and elastance will become high. So high elastance. The lung weight will also be high because of much of consolidation and exudates. As the alveoli they are collapsed in such patients, they are more likely to respond to recruitment maneuvers, and they will require a high PEEP to open up their alveoli. So in phenotype L, as I have discussed, the COVID pneumonitis, it is can be divided into two primary phenotypes, the L type and the H type. In the L type, there'll be low elastance because the compliance will be normal because there is only dysregulation in the pulmonary vasculature. As discussed, low ventilation to perfusion ratio will be there because there is not much consolidation, the lung weight will be low, and because the alveoli are already open, there's no need of recruitability, and the repeat will be also required will be low. Okay, while in the second type, where there is very low VQ ratio, okay, in that case the type will be type H, that will have ARDS like picture with bilateral pulmonary infiltrates will be there. There'll be lots of consolidation and there'll be atelectasis. Okay, now because of the presence of large number of consolidation and infiltrates, the compliance will decrease, so elastance will be high. There'll be high elastance, there'll be high right to left shunting, and because of the high amount of consolidation and infiltrates, the lung weight will increase. Also because there is presence of atelectasis, they're more likely to respond to recruitment maneuvers, okay, that are required to open up the alveoli. They're more likely to respond to recruitment maneuvers to open up their alveoli, and they will require a high PEEP to open up their alveoli. So this was about phenotype L and H. Now for the increased work of breathing, there is a direct way to estimate the increased work of respiration by esophageal manometer. Through this monitor, you can measure the intrathoracic pressure. If you have a central line inserted in the patient, then you can see deep swings in the pressure with inspiration and the CVP. Okay, that indicates the patient is exerting excess efforts to breathe, and that will come with excessive deep swings that are seen in the pressures with inspiration in the patient, and we can note down that time that the patient is exerting excessively or making lots of efforts to breathe. Okay, so either by esophageal manometry or by swings in the CVP in patients with central line, you can judge or detect the increased work of breathing. Okay, but still most of the times you need to have a clinical judgment to know the increased work of breathing. Now, last pathology is the areas of high VQ where there is micro or macrovascular thrombosis. The possibility of micro and macrovascular thrombosis is mainly caused by what we called as sepsis-induced coagulopathy. There are indicators for this that might hint this process. So increased D-dimer, increased fibrinogen, abnormalities in the coagulation profile, that is PTP, APTT, INR, etc. They may be abnormal. These findings can point out towards a presence of macrovascular thrombosis because of the sepsis-induced coagulopathy. The platelets are not usually very much low. You can see a little decrease in the platelets in very severe COVID-19 patients, but they are not very much low. So overall, you must remember that the pathology, any one pathology is not discrete among the different abnormalities in COVID-19. Any patient can progress from phenotype L to phenotype H, and they can go through different stages and you can see a mixture of pathology at one time in COVID-19 patients. So this was about the pathophysiology of COVID-19. Now discussing a little about the lab diagnosis, what we can do, what we can get done. First of all, when we get done a CBC, so what we have to look in the CBC is the white blood cell count. So the white blood cell count, it can be increased or it can be decreased. There can be presence of leukocytosis, there can be presence of leukopenia, and there can be lymphopenia. But lymphopenia, it appears to be most common. Also, in the LFTs, there'll be presence of elevation of SGOT and SGPT. In severe ICU patients, you can see elevations in the procalcitonin. Procalcitonin, however, is not very indicative of COVID-19 because it's a viral illness. Elevated procalcitonin is usually increased in bacterial sepsis. Okay. Other things you can order is a coagulation profile, with PT-INR, PTI-INR, and APTT, PT, to look for any coagulation abnormalities. Also, you can order a D-dimer to look for an increase in the D-dimer because of the sepsis-induced coagulopathy, or you can order fibrinogen levels, which will also be increased. Okay. So this was the major findings in blood. This was the end of the part with clinical presentation and pathophysiology of COVID-19. Next, I'll discuss the Indian scenario in the part 3 of the COVID-19 updates lecture series. And after that, I'll be discussing the management. So keep tuned.